Michelle Hawk is an alchemist, shaman, master healer, and spiritual mentor who began practicing shamanism in 2003 at age 15. A naturally gifted psychic and intuitive channel, Michelle's work with alchemy, shamanic energies, and multiple certifications as a master healer allow her to offer the deepest level of transformational work. Michelle mentors and trains practitioners in alchemy, shamanism, and the healing arts, and helps people master their intuitive gifts and magical birthright. And in this conversation with Michelle, we are going to be talking all about alchemy. What is alchemy? What are the different phases and the different stages of alchemy? And I personally found it very fascinating. And as this is streaming live, I'm going to be listening along with you and taking notes because it was very, very informative. And thank you for being here. If this is your first time listening, hi, my name is Cilia. If this is not your first time listening, thank you so much for coming back. I really do appreciate you being here and giving your time to listen to this podcast. And I will ask that if you have not already, please leave us a review on Apple and give us a rating on Apple as well. That really helps the podcast spread more and be seen by more people that need to hear the messages that are in this podcast. When this podcast is being released, it is December 10th, and we are going to be taking a little bit of a break for the rest of the year, a little holiday break. So this will be the last episode of the year. And if this is not your first time here, or if you have only listened to a handful of episodes, feel free to use this time to catch up on previous episodes and use that to write us a nice little review over on Apple so that more people can hear this podcast and so that our little channel here can grow. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's dive into today's conversation with Michelle Hawk. I love that. That's a really good one. Good for grounding. I'm recording already.
Perfect.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen. On this podcast, we talk about self-love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, and more. Hi, I am your host, Cilia Antonio, and I am a relationship and sexuality coach for ambitious women with a history of toxic relationships who desire to reconnect to their sensuality and who desire to feel worthy of receiving healthy love. I celebrate you for hitting play on today's episode. I hope that you find this very supportive and helpful. And if you could show some support to the podcast by hitting subscribe on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, wherever it is that you are listening to or watching this episode, it would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for being on Openly Spoken today. I am so excited to meander in conversation today with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Celia. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on your show, and I'm happy to share this meandering conversation with your audience.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, so I know that today we wanted to talk about alchemy. And what that is as like an art and a science for transformation. There are also like some different stages of alchemy you wanted to talk about. So before I ask you questions about that, I'm just curious, what is it like to be you today?
What is it like to be me today?
Yeah.
I was hosting a retreat at my house over the weekend, and I was hosting the team who was offering the retreat. It's a group that I'm in collaboration with at my house for almost a week. And most of them left today, including the two little toddlers. And there's one remaining person who's here, for another couple hours. And then we're going to go to the spa before I take her to the airport. And so today I'm feeling much more recovered than I was a couple days ago. It was a lot of work. It was it was very beautiful and also very demanding. So I reached a point a couple of days ago where I kind of lost my sense of humor, and I was just taking everything very personally. And, it's that moment where like, you need a nap, but you still want to hang out with people and like not miss out on anything, but you just need to be alone. So I, right now I'm looking back at myself from a couple days ago with like a sweetie, like head pat moment. And I have regained my sense of humor. I have regained my patience and my perspective. And I'm feeling more of the enriching benefits of having done that work and spent time with these people who I really like and respect and enjoy, and feeling slightly caught up on almost a week of kind of social overwhelm and exhaustion and planning and logistics and execution of this powerful retreat. So that's what it's like to be me today, right now.
Well, I'm celebrating you for holding all of that energy, because
thank you.
Yeah, I think most people would be afraid of that. And it's definitely like what you're describing of feeling more recovered after losing your sense of humor and all that stuff. It's definitely like you kind of expand into new version of yourself when you do things like that.
Really, it's one of the things I enjoy about this is like getting to lean into my own capacity a little more. And, it's kind of that I can do hard things. Like I can host this really involved retreat at my house. And, my home is set up for retreats, and that's something that I do within my own work here as well. But, this wasn't one of my retreats. It was a retreat that I was supporting. So it's also a little bit different too, it's not my creative vision and my say so, it's someone else's creative vision and say so, that it's just a slightly different hat to wear that in some ways feels more challenging, because I don't just get to like do whatever I think is right. I have to like check with other people. But, I also really quickly realized how not childproof my house is. So that was an eye-opening. Okay, cover the altars and and one of my houseplants was kind of ripped to shreds.
Oh, no.
So it's okay. It'll recover. It's one of the ones that you just kind of like take the pieces and stick them in dirt and then make new plants. So
like a succulent.
Yeah, it's a jade plant. So it'll be okay, but it was still one of those like moments. It's fine.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So talk
like
to
bite
me.
Marks out of it.
And
it's not poisonous.
It's like, this is a snack.
Right. Yeah.
So tell me about alchemy and a little bit about your backstory and journey of how you discovered it. Yeah. When you first came across it and like where you were in your life at that point.
Yeah. Thank you. So alchemy, just so that we can all get on the same page about, well, what is alchemy? What am I talking about here? Alchemy in pop culture consciousness has this reputation for being the process of turning lead into gold. And that is this kind of very narrow understanding of alchemy, but it is reflective of this process of transformation from a base material into its most elevated, enlightened, self-actualized state. And of course, this process is universally applicable to our bodies, hearts, minds, spirits, careers, relationships, trauma, all these aspects of self and, internally and externally. And in alchemy, alchemy developed as both a science and a spiritual practice very much together. And we actually have alchemy to thank for all of our modern sciences. You can look at like the root of the word alchemy, chemistry. It's the same word root. And, we have our ancient scientists asking questions about what is life? What is the nature of creation? What is this rock made of? And from there, doing experiments to come up with a periodic table and modern medicine and all of these wonders of what we now look at as like, oh, this is science. Originally, this was actually a very spiritual investigation to understand what is life. So that's, the science and spirituality of alchemy. It really speaks to me as kind of these two simultaneous pathways of investigating the same cosmic truth through questions about, meaning and purpose and spirit, and also, the nature of reality. So in my journey with this, I I was one of these magical kiddos, like we all are, right? We're all these, wonderful, magical, intuitive kiddos. And for me, I am really, really grateful that that never really turned off. A lot of people that I work with go through this experience. And this is, unfortunately very normal in the modern Western world, that our intuitive nature is either dismissed or shut down or somehow negated through through Western education and cultural norms and societal norms. And a lot of people go through that repression experience and then have a more dramatic awakening later in life. So a lot of this is the case for a lot of my students and my clients who come to me when, they've had a spiritual awakening and they're looking around saying, okay, now what? And they've done, energy healing training, and they've done, some yoga training or, or massage school or whatever it is. And they're looking for mentorship in what is their magic, their core magic, their intuitive gifts, their mediumship, their healership. And they're looking for spiritual skill development training. And so then they come to me. And so I work with, and this is all background of like, well, what is the context that this fits in? I work with about 50-50 practitioners and non-practitioners. So people who are looking for the tools that I offer for their own personal process of transformation and healing. And then practitioners of, social workers, therapists, massage therapists, acupuncturists, Chinese medicine, naturopaths, physician's assistants, etc., who are looking for spiritual skills to include in their helper healer toolkit so that they can offer this to their clients. So I began my path as a teenager. I started studying and practicing shamanism when I was 15 years old. And this was in 2003. So I almost literally stumbled into a shamanic workshop. I just, kind of fell in my lap. And it was like, I went into this workshop and it gave me a vocabulary for everything that I already felt to be true about the universe. It just felt very validating to me. It was
you were meant to be there.
I tell you. And, I was the only kid. Everybody else was, a proper adult. And so but it was very validating to me of like, I was such an awkward child, like, really just feeling not at home in a lot of normal, Western culture things. It just didn't make sense to me. So I go into this shamanic workshop where we're talking about animism, which is the foundation of all shamanic practices. They're animistic practices, which is looking to the life force in all things. The earth is alive, animals, plants, stones, elements, all beings, and connected through that aliveness. That's what animism means. So it was very validating to me because that was already how I felt about the world. And getting to lean into and study this practice. I spent years, finding different teachers. And also this was early 2000s. So remember, I couldn't like Google shaman near me like you can do now. But at the time, I was just following the trail of referrals of studying with a teacher and then being referred to another class or another training.
Isn't that cool how when we learn one thing, it opens that door to that next person, or even just you sharing right now the word, did you say animism? Animism, like that's an example of that because I've never heard that word before, and I'm going to Google that again later. And who knows what that will lead to. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, animism is the foundation of really all shamanic practice, and also more than shamanic practice too. There can be animistic practices that are not shamanic, but it's tuning to that connecting life force in all things. And so the root of my practice really is shamanism, but I also came across alchemy in probably like 2016. It really became very obvious to me through just, one of those very magical series of synchronicities of stumbling into, again, different, like across different resources and reading about alchemy and hearing people talk about alchemy, talking with others practitioners about alchemy, and realizing, oh, wow, like this, it was one of those same things of, oh, this is also something that is already part of my practice. And so I pursued that and I dove into training and study and practice with alchemy. And I developed a 200-hour alchemy training course, actually. that I teach and I offer certification in if for people who are interested in certification. And I'm halfway through my 5th cohort of that year-long apprenticeship right now. It's very intensive, very rewarding, and very fascinating for people coming into this crucible of that transformation. Remember, alchemy, that process of transmuting the base material into the most highly actualized version, and and on all levels. So people working with some really deep inherited trauma, developmental trauma, deep-seated wounds and grief and beliefs about themselves. Also, physical health and well-being, beliefs about the world, worthiness, relationships with parents, relationships with ancestors, and then also how that expresses in our careers, in our relationships, in our choices that we're making about our livelihoods and our purpose and our meaning making of the world. It's really touches every aspect of our lives. So then when we enter into this crucible and go through this transmutation process that includes this arc of death, purification, and rebirth, going through the stages of alchemy, people go through this really intense process that allows them to truly go very deeply and then come into this rebirth experience on the other side of it, having come home to themselves, embodying their true self, and then having this express in all areas of their lives.
Yes. I'm here for it.
Yes.
I love what you said about when you found alchemy. It was yet again another thing where you were like, yeah, this is a part of my practice already. And I think there are some people listening who maybe don't realize that alchemy is a part of their practice. So what is maybe something that you would give as an example of some sort of maybe common life situation that points to that person is intuitively using alchemy already?
Yeah, I think let's break down the 3 phases, and if you like, if it's helpful, I can go into the 7 stages of alchemy as well.
Yeah, sure.
Let's
do that.
Awesome. So, I'll tell you, when I came across alchemy and I realized this is something I'm already doing, it's because alchemy is actually like with the origins of many other spiritual practices, including shamanism. And because it is based in universal law, because it's based in these universal truths about nature and creation. And so when I work with shamanic practices about cycles of power and expansion and contraction of energy and death and rebirth, those are all shamanic principles, and they're also true in alchemy. And so it's just often just an issue of vocabulary. And of course, alchemy has some very specific teachings and principles that are unique to alchemy, but they have parallels in other spiritual traditions as well. So let's look, for example, at Christian mysticism, right? And, this is one of the most common religious expressions in the world. We can look at the Christ figure dying and going through this purification process of 3 days in the tomb and then a resurrection. And that is one version of the alchemical process of death, purification, and rebirth, which is also the same as the shamanic process of death and some aspect of underworld initiation or transmutation and then rebirth. So we have these universal principles that we actually see in many, many different traditions, that alchemy is very ancient, very, very ancient. And one can argue that it is the oldest or one of the oldest spiritual traditions, and then that many other mystic traditions draw from alchemy. And so then when we understand alchemy, I have found it to actually give greater depth of understanding and comprehension and context for myriad other spiritual traditions, because it is this blueprint of transformation. And then you can kind of put whatever lens you want on top of that and have it fit within your context and your, whatever modalities you happen to be working in.
That makes me think of what people say when they say like dark night of the soul, or that they have an identity death.
Yep. Yeah. Dark night of the soul. That is, a shamanic principle that, again, same thing, is like some aspect of themselves going through an underworld initiation, going through a death process and traveling into the underworld in order to go through this purification process and then emerge as a new version of self. That's very much that same process: death, purification, and rebirth. Yeah.
I love how witchy this is.
Very. Yeah. And so again, these three phases really are very universal, but the particularities, again, there are particularities that are very unique and specific to alchemy. So I really realized it through the shamanic lens. Oh gosh, this is alchemy. And then diving into my studies of the specifics of alchemical practice and philosophy, both through the lens of Western Hermetic alchemy and then also Eastern Taoist alchemical practice and philosophy as well. And so again, they play nice with other modalities. Like they work really well with other healing traditions and mystic traditions. It's really marvelous.
Very nice. Okay, so the 3 stages, I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, is life, death, and rebirth.
Almost.
Okay. What is it?
So the 3 phases. So there's a little bit of tricky vocab in here. So we have 3 phases and 7 stages. Okay. So the three phases are death, purification, and rebirth.
Okay, and death comes first.
Yes, death comes first.
Okay.
This is one of the parts that people most often get tripped up on. So, when I mentor people in this and when people are going through transformation, we can talk about, where do people get stuck in this cycle? Where do people have aversion and fear and resistance to this? And where might they be getting in their own way of transformation? Right?
Yeah, and resisting death, right?
Exactly. That is one of the biggest pieces that I see in people. So the death phase does come first, and then purification, and then rebirth. So let's imagine for a moment a seed, right? So you have a seed, you have a little acorn. And in order for that acorn to become a tree, it must be destroyed. So first comes death.
Yeah, the seed has to, okay, I gotcha.
Exactly. The seed has to be broken open. The seed has to go through what looks like complete destruction.
Yeah.
And there's vulnerability in that. There's uncertainty in that of, okay, so the identity of the acorn is actually dying. It's being lost. But then what emerges is something else. It's this little root and this little shoot, and it's very tender. It's very vulnerable. It's going through this, kind of exploration, like emergent identity. And then it starts to get taller, and then you start to recognize it as a baby tree. So it's reborn, and then it just gets taller and taller and becomes more of what it already is.
Yes. And then it's so abundant with all the acorns it has.
Exactly. But that original acorn had to die in order for the oak tree to be born. Yeah. And the same is true of ourselves. Like we cannot possibly grow into something else without the old version of ourselves dying.
Yes. Do you feel comfortable sharing like what the last version of yourself was that died?
That's a great question. What was the last version of myself that died? Yeah. I had one of my big life shifts recently was that I moved in to cohabitate with my partner. And we lived together in just outside of Portland in a very beautiful forested area, beautiful home that he already had before I moved in with him. And this is also the first time that I have actually cohabitated with a partner. So there was a pretty significant process for me of surrendering my perceived, I had my own place, I had my own, total independence and my own thing going on. And so there was a death of that version of myself that, had my own thing, and surrendering into the uncertainty of, it's true, things could not work out. And then I would have to move out of this place. It's not like it's my place that, that he's moving into. So there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And there's a lot of surrender in that. And so that was a moment of And kind of a prolonged period, because as soon as we started dating, I came out here, and like the land told me that this was my home. I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to live here. And then, many months later, I actually moved in. So it was a gradual process, but still it was a death process of, a version of myself dying in order to make room for this new version of me to be born and to take my seat of stewardship on this beautiful forested land that I get to live in. And I feel so grateful to be here. But yes, that version of me had to die.
Yeah. I love this topic of being just so like moving towards death instead of away from it. Because I think death shows up in so many ways. It's not just a physical death. Like you said, there's this identity of you that had this like perceived separateness. And that had to fall away. It kind of makes space for whatever is supposed to happen and whatever is supposed to be there for you to receive in life. It makes space for that to be there.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing with alchemy is there's this inherent vulnerability in it. And the mysteries of alchemy tell us that when we surrender to the fires of transformation, we surrender completely. Like you cannot selectively burn away that which does not serve. You need to throw the whole thing meaning whole self, into the fire. And we trust that whatever is true, whatever is authentic, and whatever is real and pure will make it through and survive to the other side. And whatever is not will be burned away in the fire. Yes. So it is this incredible trust fall and surrender into this process of universal law, this process of transformation. And then we know that whatever makes it through to the other side is meant to grow and thrive because it is reflective of our true nature. It is part of our true self, at least through this cycle of transformation. Because remember, this is a cycle. It's not a linear process. We're going through this on repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I love that you mentioned earlier that you work with people who have had a spiritual awakening. Because I think once you have one spiritual awakening, you're on that wheel. You're going to have many more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's going to keep on happening.
Yes. Yeah. There's deepening and opening further layers and opening of our understanding. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I'll share the last identity that I went through a death process with, and that was my perceived future of becoming a mother. I my whole life just assumed I would be a mom because that's how I was socialized to be. That's how people typically treat women. And I made so many decisions. I didn't realize this until I decided not to have kids, but I made so many decisions with that expectation in mind that I will one day have kids. And it was just this summer that I really stepped into, I'm going to be child free. And that was, I did not realize that you could grieve so hard, this version of yourself that you never even became, even though you know that the choice you're making right now is for you. It's so interesting that there was still grief there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is absolutely a thing, Cilia. And, may I share about the 7 stages of alchemy?
Yes.
Because this is totally part of the process. Okay.
Yes,
awesome.
Please.
All right. So I mentioned the 3 phases of alchemy: death, purification, and rebirth. And those are further subdivided into the 7 stages. And the first stage of alchemy is called calcination, which means to take down to the bone. And it's often it's represented by the element of fire. So when I talk about the fires of transformation, we go through this, walking into the fire and trusting that whatever is true will make it to the other side. Calcination is the loss of physical structures. And often this can show up in our lives as losing a relationship, ending a relationship, losing a job, losing a loved one. Even cleaning out your closet is, a loss of physical structure because you're getting rid of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And this can also be really tied in with this emergence of new identity of like just getting rid of clothes that you don't wear anymore because it doesn't suit this. It's like no longer reflective of this identity that you are, right? Or getting rid of things from an old relationship that you're like, okay, I'm releasing that. I'm letting that die. Mm-hmm. The second stage is called dissolution. Now, this is really what you were talking about. And dissolution works with the loss of energetic and emotional structures. This is where people do deep grief work and very deep dissolving of the etheric structures of our identity, our beliefs about ourselves, our assumptions about who we will become, and the emotional attachments and investments that we have in that. Mm-hmm. So this is something that, you know, as you closed the door on, you know, what, I'm choosing not to have human children in this life. So you are, even though you don't have any human children right now, so it's not like you lost a child, but you did close the door on the physical structure of growing a human in your body or adopting one, or however that might have looked for you. Mm-hmm. So there was this loss of a physical structure, even though it didn't already exist. You just closed the door on it ever happening. And then what followed was this emotional death of letting go of this part of yourself and dissolving that aspect of your etheric identity. So that, my friend, is dissolution all over. Yeah.
Ooh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's really, I mean, it's very powerful. It's really people, and, you know, back to the whole piece about people being afraid of death and afraid of loss. This is one of the biggest areas where I find people resist the process of change and transformation, or people are looking at their lives knowing that they're not happy or something isn't right, or they're not living their purpose, or they're in a relationship that they're just tolerating. Yeah. And they're really afraid to make changes because the process of transformation feels, you know, very overwhelming or intimidating, or they just don't even know where to start.
Yeah. And the outcome is so unknown.
Exactly. The outcome is very unknown. The process feels very like, I just don't know where to start. It feels very unfamiliar. And also, you know, we as a species, like our neurology is wired to be loss averse, right? And it's partially a survival strategy. And so we look at, okay, I really don't, even though like I know my partner isn't the one, I really don't want to end that relationship because I don't want to be alone, or I'm in this job that I kind of hate, but it's paying all my bills and I'm afraid of what might happen if I let that go. Or I'm in a house that has black mold, but at least it's close to the grocery store, or whatever the thing might be that people are tolerating or putting up with. Yeah. And ultimately, like, in order to have the love that you desire, you need to end that as a relationship. In order to like live a job that, or to have a job that helps you live your purpose, you need to let go of that other job. In order to move into a new place that you love, you've got to move out of the old one. Yeah, so you have to create the space. Death is necessary. Yeah, for rebirth. You have to let something go before you can bring in a new thing. Yeah, yeah.
And I love how nature is a really good metaphor for that, because if the leaves that fell every fall never decayed and died, then the soil would not have all the nutrients it has, and there'd be a lot of leaves outside.
Yeah. It's completely unsustainable. Yeah. You know, like we think in the body, let's imagine in the body, like, you know, growth and expansion. Everybody looks at this part, like the rebirth phase of alchemy gets all the attention of like growing into this new version of yourself, or, you know, it's very glorified, starting the new thing, moving forward. But what does that look like in the body? We call unchecked growth and expansion cancer, because our cells must die. Like our body every single day has cells that are old or unhealthy or worn out. They get composted. Those materials get broken down, and then we make new cells. And when our bodies have this unchecked growth, cells reproducing without dying, like that is because it's unsustainable. It's not right. It's not within the cycles, the natural cycles that are actually healthy and necessary for our well-being. And the same is true in our lives.
And no wonder we have such resistance to the death, because our society is kind of built on this constant expansion. Like I just have in mind, you know, like businesses and corporations is just like all about more profit than last year and more profit than last year and more. And it just never, it's not cyclical.
Nope. Yeah. And it's, yeah, and particularly in like modern Western culture, and you know, you and I are both in the United States, and like this is not unique to the United States, but we have this, you know, bigger, faster, stronger, better, new phone, new car, new whatever, make more money. Yeah, like you said, in business, more profit. Like that is the culturally rewarded version of existence. Is ever increasing, ever,
yes,
you know, being busy. You know, that's the other piece is like, you know, we can also look at rest and integration as an aspect of death.
Yeah.
Just being quiet.
Definitely.
Being still. And that is not culturally rewarded. Rest is, you know, very frowned upon in this be busy all the time, this frantic, manic, overproducing society. So no wonder people are tired and people are unwilling to actually be still enough to let themselves grieve, to be quiet enough to actually hear the truth of their inner wisdom saying, you know, this isn't right. We need to let it go.
Yes.
Because we all have that voice, and we all, if we take a moment to be still and be really honest with ourselves, people would be letting go of a lot more than they're currently holding on to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're like energetically hoarding.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what is phase or stage? Stage 3.
Stage 3. Yeah, so we had the first 2 stages, calcination and dissolution, that are part of the death phase. Now we're moving into the purification phase. And stage 3 is called separation. This is where whenever I ask people how they think transformation works, they start talking about visioning and ideas of like what they want to build. They're jumping in here. They're skipping the death part and starting here.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the active analysis and discernment stage. This is where we've reckoned with what isn't working. We surrendered to the fire. We burned the stuff. We dissolved it. We released the energetic and emotional attachments. Now we're sorting out what works, what doesn't work, what do we like, what do we not like. This is you took everything out of your closet and now you're sorting it into piles of like, definitely not keeping that, or like, I'm keeping that, but I need to dye it blue, or, you know, cut off the sleeves, and, oh, I love this. I'm definitely keeping this. And also here's a gap in my wardrobe that maybe I need to go buy like 1 or 2 new things to fill this gap now. So this is again, the sorting. It's a very like mental, much more mental process. The first 2 stages are very like in the visceral, physical, emotional, energetic aspects. They're really not mental at all. But now we're moving a little bit more into, okay, the process of the mind to evaluate and discern. And then from there, we move into stage 4, which is called conjunction. And we start to put things back together. This is where you've sorted out all your clothes. You start putting them back in your closet of what you're keeping. Or you know, we can also say like you ended a relationship, you grieved the relationship, and then you started visioning about like, okay, what did I learn from that partnership? Who am I now? What am I looking for moving forward? And now in the conjunction stage, you go make your new dating profile, or you start asking your friends to set you up. Okay, so that's the beginning to create a rudimentary form. We, you know, a place that people get stuck here is they mistake the rudimentary form for the final version. So maybe you start dating a new person who it's like, oh, they're so much better than my ex, and it's so fun.
And they're the one.
And they're the one. This must be it. But they're just like better than your ex. It doesn't mean it's the final version, right? So that's where we get tripped up in conjunction. Do not mistake the rudimentary form for the final version. Okay, keep going. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that invitation to keep deepening into like what is actually true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is actually true, and knowing that, again, that's still part of the purification phase. But moving forward, we shift into the rebirth phase. So the last 3 stages are in the rebirth phase, and the 5th stage is called fermentation. This is where it's exciting. In fermentation, Celia, do you do any fermenting? Like, do you make sauerkraut or anything like that?
I am trying to make my own kombucha, but it's not really working out.
No. Okay.
I'm working on it.
Are you poking it a lot or stirring it?
No, I've left it alone, but I think I killed my SCOBY. I don't know what happened.
No, I'm so sorry, but you're leaving it alone. That's an important part. Okay, so in fermentation is actually known as the second death, because it's it's very, very important to just let it sit.
Yes, that makes sense. Because if you take it like a pizza dough, for example, you have to not touch it and it rises.
Exactly.
And what it is when it's risen is different than what it was before.
Exactly. It goes through a process of reanimation.
Yeah. Ooh.
And so the pizza dough, right? You have when you first mix it up and you just add the yeast, you activate the yeast, you mix it, you have this kind of dense ball of dough, and then you ignore it for a couple hours. You let it sit and you let life infuse it. You let the microbes infuse it with life, and then you come back and it's this giant, soft, squishy thing of dough. Same with your kombucha. Or if you're making sauerkraut, right? Like you have like a jar of what could be rotting cabbage, but you let the microbes do their work. And then all of a sudden it's full of little bubbles and like this tanginess and probiotics because it's being infused with life. So in the mystical aspects of alchemy, in the fermentation stage is where we are receiving spirit into the rudimentary form to bring it to life. It's the reanimation stage. Okay. So this is where you go from you made that dating profile and you're starting to go on dates. You finally relax and you have fun and you start enjoying yourself. And then when you're dating, or either whether it's one person or you're dating a few people or whatever, and then it's almost like that relationship just takes on a life of its own, and it's just like gets a breath of air, and it's just so charged and beautiful, and it's like it generates its own force field. It becomes animate, right? It becomes alive. It's at that point, it's more than just two people going on a date. It's like you're creating this third entity that is the connection itself, as it's infused with its own life force. Right. So that's just, one example of how we experience fermentation, but it's this re-enlivening, but that's still not the final version. Okay. So then we're still going. Okay. So in stage 6, that's called distillation. This is another like chemical metaphor, fermentation, distillation, right? We have the alcohol version or kombucha, whatever. But in chemical distillation, it's a process of evaporation and condensation that ends up creating this very pure, very concentrated essence. And in our own process of distillation, this is a process of circulating energy to create this very pure, very concentrated essence of our true self, where it's, you're you in the realm of entrepreneurship, because I'm sure you have people tuning in who are entrepreneurs or service providers, right? So like you create your beta program, that's the conjunction stage. You create your beta program and then you run it and you have some clients in there and it kind of takes on this life of its own. That's the fermentation stage. And then you refine. And you run it through a few times and you're coming more into the core of, okay, what is the service that you're providing and what is the transformation and healing that you're seeing in your clients, and distilling down the core true message of the offering, right? Or you're coming into clearer and clearer refinement of your own personal identity until you feel really anchored in this very clear, very concentrated version of your own core essence. Which takes us to our final stage, which is called coagulation. There's more. This is the last one. It's called coagulation, and this is the stage of radiance. It's actualization. Is
coagulation what happens when you make cheese and it turns into like solid? Is that what's happening when the milk turns into like a solid cheese? Or is that is that something else?
That might be called coagulation. I mean, whenever I think of coagulation, I think of blood, like blood clotting. Okay. So it could be, it's this process of like condensation. So if you cut yourself and you don't have a blood disorder, what normally will happen is your blood starts binding together to coagulate and to create a blockage. And so you can think of that energy like coming together and condensing to form a crystallized object. And in alchemy, like the term that we hear in this stage is the Philosopher's Stone. So if anybody's read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, this is an alchemical term where it's the product of alchemy that, again, in pop culture alchemy, we know that the Philosopher's Stone can turn any metal into gold and can create the elixir of life. But what that means for us in our spiritual personal growth, self-actualization is we've created this spiritual and material object of ourselves, because the spiritual and the material are deeply connected. You can't have one without the other. That has condensed and concentrated to form this fully actualized thing that has the power to create radiance in the world and generate life in the world. That's the turning any metal into gold, is we create gold through the presence of our fully actualized selves. We inspire that radiance in others around us. We plant seeds of gold through our actions and our words, our compassion, our love, our generosity. And the elixir of life is life begets life. You belong to life and life loves you. And through you allowing life to flow through you and to live as this fully expressed, radiant version of yourself, we spread life in the world. And that is really true immortality. Right there is our own radiance, inspiring radiance.
I love this so much. I can't wait to listen back and take notes.
Great. Awesome. Well,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, and for all of you who are tuning in, if you're like, oh my gosh, that was a lot of words and a lot of alchemy and you want to go take notes, I have a guide that, Celia, I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes as well, but you can go download the free guide to the stages of alchemy from my website. And so you can go see all the terms spelled out. And in that guide, I also have places where people commonly get stuck or blocked in the cycle of alchemy. And I have suggested practices and exercises for each stage of alchemy as well. And it's a guide to help you figure out where you are in the cycle of alchemy and then what to do now that you know what stage you're in.
Oh, very nice. I will definitely download that.
Awesome.
And it's in the caption or show notes. And I would love to ask you a couple questions that I ask every guest towards the end. The first one is, what does self-love mean to you?
Self-love, it has meant different things to me at different points in my life. Like the way that I need to love myself now looks really different than the way that I needed to love myself a year ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think right now, one of the ways that I need to love myself is with a lot of humor and trust and surrender and patience. So right now, self-love to me looks like patience. And it looks like, looking at these initiation cycles that I'm in right now, both, personally and professionally, and knowing that there's a lot of very beautiful, very powerful energy that is coming into my life, that has been coming into my life for a while. And not trying to rush it, not trying to hurry up and figure it out, not trying to demand anything of it, but instead to simply sit with my hands open like this and to receive it and to work with it as it comes in and to be in profound appreciation as it naturally lands. So that's what self-love is looking like to me right now, as this version of myself that I am.
That's such a beautiful invitation to not be super rigid with our self-love or our routines, because I think it can be easy to step into this kind of disembodied, I have to do XYZ, whatever XYZ is.
Well, I think, Celia, this is also looking at because we continually go through this process of transformation, we become different versions of ourselves, and those different versions of ourselves need different things.
Yes.
So I'm betting, like, when you went through this process of really deciding and embodying that you were going to be child-free in this lifetime, what you needed for your self-love in that decision portal probably looked really different from what your self-love looks like at other iterations of your consciousness.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was also a time, and I know a couple of people can relate to this hearing it, but there was a time where I used to practice yoga so devotionally every morning at like 5:30 a.m. And I've spoken to other people who also did that and who also, like me, used to teach yoga. Mm-hmm. And when we get into this chapter of life where that's no longer supportive, we feel kind of guilty because we used to teach it as this medicine to keep going into, and now we're not going into that medicine anymore. But we need something different now.
Yeah. And part of self-love is the attunement to what that actually means.
Yeah.
That is part of that is, okay, what does my practice, my most beneficial practice look like today? Mm-hmm. And knowing, I have not generally been like a consistent yogi practice, but my movement practice typically looks more like it's had a lot of iterations over the years, but from like long distance running to qigong, like that's still part of my practice, but also weightlifting and like having, warrior practices. Mm-hmm. And like this version of my body right now is really not in shape, quote, in the way that I am used to being in shape. But looking at my version of self-love right now is asking me instead to spend a lot of time like in the forest and touching trees. And, I'm hiking and I'm breathing. And it's just a really different version of embodiment that I have come to soften into, even though it looks like, my past version of self-love was being very dedicated to my physical fitness. And right now it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to all of that. Okay, so I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
The first one is, what makes you feel the most grounded?
My dog. Like, petting my dog, taking care of my dog, walking with my dog.
Yes.
My dog is her name is Athena, and she's laying on the floor right next to me right now. It was raining really hard earlier, and she gets a little nervous when it's like very rainy or windy. And she is a nervous buttercup. I got to tell you, she is such a tender soul. And looking at her, you wouldn't necessarily think that because, she's a really strong, very muscular mystery mix dog, but she's, really muscly. And she is the most soft, tender, nervous, anxious little like butterfly of a dog. So, but with her, part of my grounding and stability is really anchoring into patience and consistency and routine, because that's what she needs to feel safe.
Yeah.
And spending a lot of time outside. Like I've had her for several years now, and I've been through a ton of training with her just, to help her feel more confident and safe. And so now we walk everywhere off leash together, and we go, I live in the forest. So we go walking every day in the forest. We're hiking and breathing the fresh air and touching trees and getting muddy every single day. But also but her beingness, because she's so sensitive, it requires me to be grounded and stable because she needs that to feel safe. Mm. So it helps me she helps me through her needs to be more attuned to my equanimity and my grounding and stability.
Mm. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, she's great.
The next question is, what is your favorite part about being a woman?
That's a great question. What is my favorite part about being a woman? I feel like there's I went through a pretty big like divine feminine initiation several years ago. And I want to say like 2015 or 2016, where growing up, I was a total tomboy kiddo. I was like a sporty, and I'm sure a lot of people tuning in can resonate with this I was, definitely more, and I look back also at, I think when I was a young person, or if when I was a young person, the concept of being non-binary was more available at that time, I might have embraced that. But as a young person, that wasn't really in the, the lexicon.
Yeah.
So I didn't.
I never even heard of that until 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember exactly when it came across my radar either, but I look back at myself as a young person, like, yeah, I probably would have leaned into having a non-binary identity. And I didn't. That wasn't available to me. But I was very connected with my own masculine nature and very dismissive of my feminine nature. And I went through a pretty big initiation of that around 2015-ish, maybe a little earlier, but still, like, my entry point into that was really connecting with the dark goddess archetypes. So the like destroyer goddess Kalima vibe, and the like that primal creation and destruction force, like much more than the Aphrodite, Persephone, like the light beauty goddess felt, still pretty far away to me. So creator destroyer was my entry into that. And then, like, reflecting on that in my own body, like the process of, I don't have human children either, but I have this, like, it feels very fascinating to me, the idea of growing a human in my body. Like the potential of that feels really just like mind blowing. Like, that's,
I agree.
Right. That's really wild. And so, again, I say that having not had that experience, but it's, it just has this fascination to me of, like, life, constructing life and having the capacity to do that. And, I think there's also this, I really, really appreciate my friendships with women. I love that. I love my close, intimate sisterhood friendships with other women and other femme type people. And I love that like that type of emotional intimacy and relational intimacy is so celebrated and rewarded, particularly for women. And it makes me very sad that it's not quite as culturally rewarded and recognized for men, although we're getting there.
Yeah, we are slowly.
Yeah. Yes, we're working on it. But that is one of my favorite parts about being a woman, is like the way that I get to have this very deep emotional intimacy with people that I care about, and that it's very safe for me to be soft and to be, in addition to being the creator destroyer Kalima feminine, the dark feminine, it's also very safe for me to be so tender.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes. Oof. I think we also learn to know who we are more, the more we have that availability to lean into that sisterhood connection. Because I don't know if your story relates to this, but like when I also was a tomboy and rejecting femininity, I was more leaning towards friendship with boys and men. And I wasn't really open and available for sisterhood until I worked on my own divine feminine awakening as well.
Yeah.
And in that, I learned who I really was, because another woman is a mirror, a reflection.
Yeah. Yeah. Very powerful. I think the boys, I was friends with boys in my class, but I was friends with the other tomboy girls. Like so I had, those were my more natural social connections. So with other girls who were also nature-y, kind of sporty and nerdy and alternative, like not the, the very feminine girls. That was not really who I was hanging out with.
I know you mentioned your guide with the shamanism and all the like terms, but I would love to know how else people can connect with you, what else you've got going on, maybe a little bit about your certification, all that fun stuff. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So for anyone who is interested, you are welcome to reach out to me. You can find me through my website, michellehawk.com. That's hawk like the bird. And there you'll not only find the guide to download about the stages of alchemy, but I also offer some other trainings, mentorship, including one-on-one mentorship, but particularly this 200-hour alchemy certification and training that is a year-long in-depth apprenticeship. This is for both practitioners and non-practitioners. My clients are consistently about 50% of each. So with this very deep dive apprenticeship, you learn the fundamentals of alchemy. You learn alchemical practice and philosophy and specific practices and techniques, energy healing techniques, meditation practices of how to work with this process of transformation. You'll also learn embody alchemy, so movement practices. Most of the modules also have movement practices and physicality aspects to anchor this into the body. And it's really, it's very lovely. And, if I say so myself, like creating this 200-hour course, it kind of created itself. It very much took on a life of its own. And for those of you tuning in who are entrepreneurs, when you have this very divinely inspired and divinely anchored creation, that's really what this is. It's a mystery school lineage that happened to come through me as the human vessel to bring it into being. It very much has its own consciousness that I steward and shepherd. It also includes in-person retreats at my beautiful temple home in the forest and one-on-one support from me and connection with your cohort of like-hearted seekers. So it is a very, very in-depth, very thorough and lovely study and practice of alchemy and personal transformation, and then translating that into our lives. And it's a lot of fun. It's very humbling.
Mm-hmm. I celebrate you for being able to share a divine creation through your business, and that it's a humbling experience.
So humbling. Yeah. So fun. It's simultaneously like very, very rewarding and awesome. And it kind of takes some pressure off because it's not like human me, Michelle, coming up with stuff. And it's also at moments it has this frustrating feeling of like, it's not my thing. It's something that I am stewarding in the world, and I am in service to this mystery school lineage that is happening to come through the vehicle of my business and my service and me as a human in holding that. So it's very beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Cilia. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on your show. I'm so happy and grateful. And for all of you tuning in, I hope this was helpful to you. Again, please feel free to reach out to me through my website, michellehawk.com, and let me know what you think of alchemy and of this episode.
Yeah. Do you want to leave listeners with one closing thought?
Choose change before change chooses you.
Yes.
We all know what that feels like, of the whisper of, that's not right. Something needs to change. And then it gets louder and louder and louder until it's, smacks you in the head. So we can avoid the smacking if we listen to the whispers.